Joseph Henry Thompson, a World War I recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor, was a star in many respects. He served his university as a star athlete, but it was his leadership that set him apart from others. He served his universities as a coach, he served his state, his nation, his whole life was devoted to service. Thompson was born in 1871 in Kilkeel, Ireland, a small fishing port in Ulster, Northern Ireland, at the base of County Down. After immigrating to the United States with his family, he enrolled at Geneva College in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. As a 27-year-old freshman, Thompson coached his Geneva basketball team to an intercollegiate championship. The young basketball star also excelled in wrestling and gymnastics, but it was football where Thompson would make a name for himself in Pittsburgh sports. Thompson's name would be attached to an historic yet bizarre game in November 1903 between Geneva and Washington and Jefferson colleges. Geneva was trailing by 6 points with 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Quarterback Paul Critchlow of Geneva called a reverse, and Joe Thompson was running to the open field when about mid-field a Washington and Jefferson substitute apparently came off the field to tackle Joe. Chaos erupted, and the fans swarmed onto the field. After attempts to disperse the crowd failed, the game was called in W&J's favor, and from that day forward, the legend of Who Tackled Joe Thompson was born. After graduating from Geneva, Thompson continued his postgraduate work at the Western University of Pennsylvania, today known as the University of Pittsburgh. As a player, he helped his team earn their first undefeated season in 1904. He continued to play football while working on his law degree. Fellow classmate and student team manager Benjamin Jenkins would later serve with Thompson in the 110th Infantry during World War I. In 1905, Thompson enlisted in the Pennsylvania National Guard and was commissioned a second lieutenant in November of 1906 at the New Brighton Barracks. After graduating from Pitt, he coached a few high school teams, but in 1909, Thompson was named the head coach of the Pittsburgh Panthers, where he coached for 4 years. His high point coming in 1910, where he coached his team to an undefeated season, a team that was never scored upon that year and considered by many to be the season's national champions. In 1913, the football reins were passed to former Princeton All-American Joe Duff. The year Duff took over as head coach, Thompson was elected to the Pennsylvania State Senate as a Republican serving in the 47th District. On April 6, 1917, when the U.S. declared war on Germany, Thompson was serving as a major in the Pennsylvania 10th Infantry. This unit would later be designated the 110th Infantry, attached to the 28th Division for service in France. Thompson would command the 1st Battalion. One of the tools I'll use when researching any World War I veteran from Pennsylvania is the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission's website. They give you free access if you're in Pennsylvania, and I'm specifically going to go down to the World War I Veteran Service and Compensation files and view his record. In the case of Thompson, I was interested in learning more about how he earned his Medal of Honor. The records show that he was wounded 4 times. 4 wound stripes, the precursor to the Purple Heart, tell us of his most difficult days at a place called Aprimon.
On the very right of the 28th Division's front, the 110th set its sights on the village of Aprimon. Less than 4 kilometers north of Mont Blancville, Aprimon sits on steep high ground with commanding views of the Meuse Valley. Aprimon's value lay in its position and the fact that from it ran one of the few roads into the Argonne, all the way to Binarville on the other side. North of Aprimon lay the village of Châtel-Chéhéry, and near it were two hills, 244 and 223, where the Germans maintained numerous artillery batteries. After an hour's worth of artillery pounding the village, the doughboys of the 3rd Battalion, 110th Infantry, attacked from a riverbed. The Germans were waiting for them and cut the attack to pieces. The Americans regrouped and launched a second attack from the south over open ground. Tanks supported them this time, and the Americans who made it across the murderous fire that swept the fields broke into the ruins of the village. Close quarter combat in the streets followed. The young Americans fought recklessly and without cease, and their pressure overwhelmed the German enemy. The Germans broke and retreated, and the doughboys chased them 500 meters north of the village before digging in there. The going was rough for the 28th Division. German resistance was becoming harder and harder, but the advance was continuing. More ground had been taken that day, and progress would hopefully continue.
Tune in to listen to the entire story. Here we see the 28th Division at the base of Aprimon. We know from reading the 110th Infantry's regimental history that the Germans did not easily give up the village. Thompson was out front, seeking shelter inside a wine cellar, sitting next to 2nd Lieutenant Albert Ornstein of Company G. As shells rained in on the village, one of these incoming shells killed Ornstein. Thompson escaped from the collapsing ruins, and Ornstein's body was discovered 13 days later. Only his head was exposed. A burial detail dug out his body from the ruins and buried him in a nearby orchard. A great resource available to researchers has been made possible from the yeoman's work of Weldon Hoppy. Through the American World War I burial card project that he spearheaded on Zooniverse, you can now search the data of these World War I burial cards, which is phenomenal. But in my opinion, the impressive work comes with how Weldon has coupled this information with his interactive map. For example, knowing that Ornstein was killed, I can search his name, and the fact that the burial card has coordinates, I can pull up the location of the burial plat, which has been digitized by the National Archives. When Major Thompson was in charge of the front line on September 28th, the commander of the 110th Infantry, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Martin, directed Thompson to wait until the 109th Infantry on its left could arrive abreast of him, as he did not want the 110th to be fired upon from the flanks. Thompson complied with Martin's orders, but General Thomas Dara, 55th Infantry Brigade Commander, believing that Thompson was slow to act, decided to remove Thompson. It was a critical situation, Thompson being entirely familiar with Lieutenant Colonel Martin's wishes. In a dangerous protest against General Dara, Lieutenant Colonel Martin immediately directed Captain Pierce to take charge of the headquarters and to issue orders under his name. Captain Pierce was now in charge of the 110th Infantry, as Martin proceeded from his command post into the village to take charge of the front line. The flanks were indeed exposed, and repeated requests were made to General Dara to furnish assistance. By 4 p.m. on September 28th, Thompson was returned to the regiment where he consolidated the 1st and 2nd Battalions. On the morning of September 29th, General Dara was relieved from his command. Pershing selected one of his intelligence officers, General Nolan, to take his place. Nolan called off any further orders for the attack on the 29th in order to get a first-hand look at the situation himself. About 7:30 p.m. on the 29th, the Germans counterattacked. The surprise and fury of this German attack drove the Americans to the northern edge of the village. But a well-executed counterattack by Major Thompson and about 100 men forced the enemy to be driven back. It was here that Thompson would receive his first wound. While injured by fragments of high explosive shells, he remained with his men. The next day, September 30th, the Americans continued to dig in to keep Aprimon. Efforts were made to make strong points and further resist Germans who were not ready to give up the village. Again, Thompson was wounded for a second time, and again he stood with his men. On October 1st, the Germans made their final attack, but this time they threw 2 regiments into the fight. It would be this date that Thompson would show his unquestionable grit. Wounded twice, once by high explosive shell fragments and once gassed, he was cited for his extraordinary heroism. He encouraged his battalion in the front line by constantly braving the hazardous fire of machine guns and artillery. His courage was mainly responsible for the heavy repulse of the enemy. Later in the action, when the advance of his assaulting companies were held up by fire from hostile machine gun nests and all but one of the 6 assaulting tanks were disabled, Major Thompson, with great gallantry and coolness, rushed forward on foot 3 separate times in advance of the assaulting line. Under heavy machine gun and anti-tank gunfire, he led the one remaining tank to within a few yards of the enemy machine gun nest. The tank succeeded in reducing the machine gun, thereby making it possible for the infantry to advance. Thompson was ordered to the rear to recover from his painful wounds, and by dark his regiment was relieved and placed into reserves. He would later be awarded the French Croix de Guerre with Palm, and by the end of the month he was promoted from major to lieutenant colonel. From the start of the offensive until October 3rd, the 110th Infantry had suffered nearly 200 dead and 600 wounded. Thompson's service with the 110th Infantry spanned multiple engagements during the war. News clippings in western Pennsylvania from July through November kept the public informed of his brave service. On December 31st, 1918, Thompson was selected to be the athletic director for the entire Second Army. He was promoted to the rank of colonel. The regiment returned home to the United States in May 1919. A parade received the men in Philadelphia on May 15th. Thompson did not stay in the United States for long. Returning back to France, he served as field manager for the Inter-Allied Games that took place in Paris from June 22nd until July 6, 1919, at Pershing Stadium. Returning to the United States, Thompson resumed his civilian life, practicing law in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. As a civilian, he maintained an active role in the newly established American Legion, where he was elected as Pennsylvania State Commander in September 1921. In November of that year, the city of Pittsburgh hosted French General and Supreme Allied Commander Ferdinand Foch. A luncheon was given in his honor at the William Penn Hotel, where he was presented with a key to the city. A toast was offered up by Colonel Thompson, and a parade followed throughout downtown Pittsburgh, with Colonel Thompson accompanying the general throughout the day. On December 14, 1922, Major General Charles Muir, commander of the 28th Division, decorated Joseph Henry Thompson with the Congressional Medal of Honor. A ceremony was held at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Thompson was accompanied by his wife Violet and their 13-year-old son, Joseph Jr. The Medal of Honor replacing the previously awarded Distinguished Service Cross. On February 1st, 1928, Joseph Henry Thompson died of a heart attack at the age of 56. Newspapers reporting the effects of the war contributing to his early demise. He was buried in the Beaver Falls Cemetery, a large cross marking his gravesite, listing the engagements from his service with the 110th. In 1971, Joe Thompson was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, and in more recent years, Geneva College in Beaver County, also recognizing their local star. In May 2019, the Ulster History Circle commemorated Joseph Henry Thompson with a blue plaque in his hometown of Kilkeel, Ireland. Thompson's days as a leader are legendary. He was an inspiration to his men, everyone calling him Joe. He was described as one of the most popular and nervy officers on the battlefield. When the 1928 Pitt Record published his obituary, it was said that Colonel Thompson, for many years, is destined to be one of inspiration wherever Pittsburgh alumni or undergraduates congregate. As an example of persistence, faithfulness, unselfishness, and courageous leadership, his memory will endure.